Hello and welcome to episode 58 of the Epic Classroom Podcast. My name is Trevor Muir, and on this podcast, we talk about teaching, stories, ideas, and research to help students grow and thrive in school and for their educators to thrive as well. So whether you are a teacher or administrator or anyone else who supports education, I'm glad you're here. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. It's been a little bit. The podcast has been neglected this winter and early spring because there's just so many things going on. One, life is busy. Work has been busy, and that's sometimes really good, and it has been good, but it's been a lot. And also, I got a new puppy, and I don't know about you if you've ever had a puppy, but they keep you entertained and busy and working all hours of the day and sometimes even night. And so it's been a really good winter around here. I've gotten a chance to travel some and lots of really great family time. And I've got to be with educators all over the place. And I've got to be with a little now 13-week-old Australian Shepherd puppy. And so, yeah, life is good. And I am really excited to be back in the podcast booth getting to share with you. And I'm really, really excited about what I want to talk about today. And so I'm just going to dive right into it. But before that, I just wanted to throw out there, what is the exact date? I'm going to be just outside of New York City at a really, really cool conference. It's called Lyric, and it's called the Tech Expo Conference, put on by Lyric, and there is just going to be people from all over the place there. I got to do the keynote at it last year, and this year I'm going to lead a 2-day strand all about innovative teaching practices and joy and learning and collaboration and purpose and all these things that I love to talk about. And this is actually an event that's open to the public. So if you live anywhere near New York or really anywhere and you want to fly into New York, go check out the Tech Expo put on by Lyric. And Lyric is LHRIC. I'll be there for 2 days. It's at this beautiful, beautiful retreat and conference center. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there because I am so excited about that coming up. And it's something that people are invited to. It's not just a private thing. That's often what I do is go and speak and work at individual school districts or conferences that are put on that aren't always open to the public. But this one is, and I would love to see you there. So anyway, there is that. But I want to tell you a little bit about my wife. So last year, my wife decided that she wanted to start running again. So my wife, Allie is her name. She hasn't had a regular running routine since college. I remember when we first started dating in college, she was running all the time. And then we got married and we moved up north where I live in Michigan, which is pretty much the epicenter of the polar vortex. It's all cold weather originates where we live and spreads outwards. And so there's like huge chunks of the year you can't run here. And then we had babies, and that makes it difficult, and work and life. So she hasn't had a running routine in a while, but we're both approaching the age of 40 right now. And she figured it was now or never if she's going to get back into a nice, strong running routine. And so Allie signed up for a 10K. So she had a goal, something to work towards. And so she had this big 10K coming up. And last year she trained consistently for several months, going from a non-runner to a runner. And so she trained for several months. And then finally on race day in downtown Grand Rapids, she completed a 10K. And she felt really great about it. And we were all so proud of her. And her body felt strong. And she just genuinely enjoyed both the payoff, finishing the race, but also all of the preparation leading up to it. She was back into the routine. And so motivated by that experience, she signed up for a 25K. We have this big race in Grand Rapids called the Riverbank Run. It's 15 and a half miles. I ran it back in 2018. And I haven't even gotten close to running those type of miles since. And so she was like, I want to do this. And she had 4 months to train for it. So again, she trained and then she raced and she finished strong. And she felt really, really great about that. We were all freaking out and proud of her. And so she was like, you know what? I want to run a marathon. I was like, all right, you go, girl. And so she registered for a marathon the following fall, which was just this last fall. And after months of training and stretching and long, grueling runs on the weekend and sore muscles and going through a surprising number of running shoes. Who would have guessed that running can be such an expensive sport when you're having to train long miles? Allie crossed the finish line of the marathon, 26.2 miles. And of course, I was rightfully in awe of this woman. And so now, I want you to do a little imagining with me for a minute here. Imagine if I had to give Allie a grade for her running ability based on her time or speed. Right? Running a marathon? Yeah, that's clearly an A. Right? A year ago, she wouldn't have been able physically or even mentally for that. But then she ran a marathon. Yeah, I'm giving her a nice, solid A for running 26.2 miles. But, a year ago, back then, she probably would have, just after a 10K, compared to the marathon, she would have gotten a C, right? But then she practiced, and she built endurance, and she improved, and her ability grew. And now her higher grade, the A, reflects where she's at now. But in a traditional grading system, we'd have to average the C from the 10K and then the A from her marathon, and we would call her a B runner, right? Like in between the two is a B. I don't know about you, my friends, but that just doesn't sit right with me, right? If you've ever watched someone finish a marathon, you know that's A-level work. But because of where she was at the beginning of her training journey, her grade would average to a B. She got a C with the 10K, a B with the Riverbank run, the 25K, and an A with the marathon. And so she ends up with a B. Are you seeing where I'm going with this? In school, if a student scores a C for their writing ability in September, then engages in practice and instruction, and in November they score an A, that C is not reflective of their ability anymore, is it? No, instead it's just a marker for where they were, and it shows how far they've come. It shows how much they grew. Incorporating it into their final grade doesn't really make any sense. And yet this is exactly what we do with students' grades in most traditional classrooms across the country. We take their aggregate score and we use that to reflect their knowledge and their ability, knowing full well that it doesn't accurately reflect their current knowledge and ability. Right? This current framework, traditional grading, it's got some negative implications because of this. One, it punishes growth. A student who starts off struggling, but then works hard and improves and ultimately demonstrates mastery is still penalized by their earlier attempts. This sends the message to them, hey, it doesn't matter how far you've come. Your missteps will follow you. It doesn't matter how much you grew as a writer. How you did in September is going to follow you even though you got better at it, right? This approach, it has this tendency of discouraging effort, and really, it fails to honor the learning process. But then also, it misrepresents what a student actually knows. Final grades are supposed to communicate a student's current level of understanding. When I look at a grade, that should tell me how adept you are at that skill, at that competency. It tells me if you've mastered it or not. That's what it's supposed to do, right? But if a grade is based on an average of a student's performance over time, it really just kind of becomes a murky reflection of both learning and unlearning. And it's not really representative of where the student is now. It doesn't tell me what they know. It tells me what they know combined with what they used to not know. Are you with me? Right? And with that, it kind of undermines the purpose of the assessment in the first place, right? Assessments are supposed to inform learning. They're not supposed to label students. It's supposed to inform us what they know, what they've learned. But if a low grade lingers long after a student has mastered the skill, assessments shift from being a tool for growth to really just being a permanent record of their past failures. Who wants that, right? Like, can you imagine? Here's a relevant example. I remember my very first year of teaching. They had a system to evaluate and label teachers. You could either be minimally effective, or no, okay, I'm trying to remember back. This is a long way back. You could either be not effective, minimally effective, effective, or highly effective. So like those were the labels that you were given. I remember in my first year of teaching, I was given effective. Right? Like I worked my tail off. I loved my work. I did lots of things right, but good Lord, I did lots of things not right. And so it's like, yeah, you weren't highly effective yet. And so like, that's where I was my first year. I remember my probably fourth year was the first year that my principal gave me highly effective. That was the year she said, all right, you are hitting these marks. And so it's like, all right, you're highly effective now. By the way, I just want to pause real quick. Some of these evaluation things are not that important. I just want to throw that out there. Like, nobody walks around saying, hey, I'm highly effective. I'm a highly effective educator. It's like, yeah, nobody really uses that, but it's mostly for paperwork, unless there's a problem. But anyway, I do remember getting that highly effective and being like, okay, yeah, this feels right now, right? I've put some years into this and I feel like I'm nailing it, and I'm glad to be recognized for that. But you wouldn't say to me like, hey, I heard, you're in between highly effective and effective now. What do you mean? It's like, well, you got effective your first year of teaching and you're highly effective now. That would average out to like kind of being in the middle of that, right? The median is in between those. And it's like, yeah, but no, I'm highly effective now. I've learned, I've grown, I've gotten better at what I do. I'm no longer just effective. It sounds so silly, by the way, saying all these words, but this is what's in teacher evaluations. But it's like, no, that effective, it's thrown out. Like, it's forgotten. It was a building block. It was a step to get me to where I am now, which is highly effective, right? Like, I've learned and I've grown, and like, yeah, that makes sense. And yet when we look at traditional grading, it doesn't follow this path. Right? It doesn't, it records failures and incorporates them with successes, which isn't really how it works, right? And this creates inequity, right? Not every student starts with the same background knowledge or support or confidence. Students start at different places. And so averaging grades means students who need more time to learn, maybe it just didn't come as quickly, or maybe they didn't have the same support that other students have, or whatever it is. Right? They're penalized for needing that time to learn more. It rewards those who come in with prior knowledge or maybe a higher aptitude for a certain skill or ability. And so it rewards them. It says, hey, you got this the first time. And so, your early grade is going to be higher. And so therefore that averages in with your final grade and you're going to have a higher average here than students who maybe didn't come in with that prior knowledge or didn't have the same support or maybe, what, does that make sense? Right? And so it punishes them. It punishes those who are actually doing the most growing. Whereas, wouldn't it make more sense to say, okay, you came in with this low mark, you put in the effort, and now you've got this high mark. That's what I'm going to pay attention to here. Right? Like that's what stands out as more important. So that's traditional grading. And you can see the holes in it. And I know there are arguments and counter arguments for what we're talking about here, but I think we'd all agree, like, yeah, there are some holes in this grading system. And so that's traditional grading. An alternative to that, to traditional approach to grading, is something called competency-based grading. In this model, students are assessed on their ability to demonstrate specific skills or knowledge, which we can call competencies, rather than on how well they perform overall across a set of assignments. The focus shifts from averaging every score, right? Like figuring out what the average is there. And so it kind of gets rid of this idea of averaging, and instead it's looking at whether a student has mastered the key concepts that you need them to learn, those competencies, by the end of a unit or a course. Instead of being penalized for early struggles, students are given the opportunity to improve their work over time, and then their grade reflects their most recent or strongest level of understanding. To stick with my wife's running example, if running a marathon is her measure of mastery of the skill of running, then she has mastered that competency. And while the 10K was an important step for achieving mastery, it's no longer a measure of her ability anymore. It's irrelevant data. It was just a building block to get to mastery, right? This approach provides a clearer, more accurate picture of what students actually know and can do, and it gives all learners, especially those who need more time or support, a fair chance to succeed. So here's the thing, though. My hope is that this concept is resonating with you, that it's more important to see where students are now rather than incorporating where they've been into where they are now. But a nice, clear understanding, competency-based grading really makes sense for me. And hopefully that's making sense to you. However, if you're like me, and maybe you were raised in a traditional school system, or maybe you've taught in a traditional school, the idea of eliminating averages within a learning unit, allowing retakes or allowing your class to be more self-paced and students to work at different paces and not counting every grade or not averaging early failures into successes at the end, maybe that raises some red flags for you. Right? Of course it does for me. I absolutely get that. And I get pushback on it when I go and talk about this stuff sometimes. And I'm always very, very aware and empathetic of people who give pushback. Moving towards competency-based grading, rethinking how we assign grades in this traditional model that has been in use for so long, it requires some rethinking of deeply ingrained habits and about how we assess and report learning. It asks us to see grades not as a record of completed tasks, but more as like a reflection of current understanding. And that can feel like a big shift, especially in schools where points and percentages and averages have long been the norm. But the goal isn't to lower expectations or eliminate accountability for students. This is a mix-up people have when they say, oh, you should allow students retakes, or hey, you shouldn't be penalized for past scores. You need to be held accountable for your work, even if it was at the beginning of a unit. It's like that's going to lower students' lower expectations and accountability from students if we go and shift and change that. And it's like, I hear you there. But that's not what we're trying to do here. Instead, what we're trying to do is make sure that our grading practices align with the actual purpose of education, which of course, and I talk about it all the time on this podcast and lots of videos and writing, it's to help students learn and grow, right? Like that's the point of school. Would you agree with that? I hope you're nodding your head yes, because I can't see you right now. But right, like if the purpose of education, the K-12 experience is to help students learn and grow, well, then shouldn't the grading aspect of school, shouldn't assessments be largely about helping them do that? And so when we prioritize mastery over timing, we create space for meaningful growth and deeper learning and more accurate reporting of student progress. But this mindset shift, it doesn't require an entirely new system overnight, right? Like that's something I want to say so loud and clear. You don't have to throw everything out to make way for grading in this way or viewing student work in this way. But it does begin with one powerful question. What do we want our grades to communicate, right? What is the point of this? And so if this way of thinking about grades is piquing your interest at all, I want to give you a few tips to kind of get your feet wet and maybe try a few things as you incorporate some of these big ideas in how you give students assessments. Because it is a shift. It's a paradigm shift. And sometimes shifts are challenging. Sometimes they take time. Going from a way of viewing grades and recording student progress for over 100 years, like I said, to a completely different way or a different way at all, it can make you a little uncomfortable. And so my first tip to you would be to start small. You don't need to overhaul everything all at once. What if you tried implementing competency-based grading for just one single unit this semester? We've got a couple more months until summer. What if you're like, okay, I'm going to dig into this a little bit more. And by the way, I've got a whole article about this with other details and it's written out. It's on my website at trevormuir.com/competency-based grading, where I kind of lay it out so you can dig in deeper there. I'm going to have a video out on this soon. And then there's also lots of more information on the internet. We're just scratching the surface here. So feel free to go dig into it. But what if just one single unit this semester, you are just going to try grading a little bit differently? Figure out what the key competencies of a learning unit are. What are the learning goals here? And then just assess accordingly. And then when that unit's done, reflect on how it went. What would you do differently? How did your students react to this? How did you feel about it? Did it help students grow and learn and develop their growth mindset more? And did you have a more accurate picture of what they know by the end of that unit because of the way that you scored them? Reflect on that and then, make some adjustments. You're not having to change everything about how you grade. You can still submit A through F grades with competency-based learning, but you're basing the grades on their most recent and strongest evidence of mastery rather than averaging all of their attempts anymore. But you can still use grades traditionally. You don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You can still use standards-aligned rubrics to assess students' specific skills and knowledge, and you can assign grades based on their mastery level. But now it's about their latest attempt. It's about where they are when it goes into the grade book. Maybe the grade book is just a little bit more adaptable and flexible. You know, they had a discussion. You were using a rubric to rate their discussion skills, and you said, you know what, you're at a C level for discussion. And then later in that unit, you had another discussion, and holy smokes, they took some feedback, and they did way better this next time, and they were like, and they scored an A on the rubric. Yeah, remove that C. That C has nothing to do with anything anymore. That was feedback for the student. Hey, there's some work you could do to improve this skill. Oh, you improve that skill? All right, we're getting rid of the C and we're putting in an A, right? I'm not going to penalize you for where you were back then. Now, you might be saying right now, well, what if they got that C because they didn't prepare? They weren't working very hard. They were goofing off, and so therefore that reflected in the grade right there. Shouldn't we hold them accountable? Well, absolutely, definitely, and that's what that C was for a time. And if they didn't improve their behavior, if they didn't put in the work to get better at it so that when they reassessed, when they had this other opportunity, it's like, if you didn't do that and you had this other opportunity and then you did it again, it's like, yeah, you know what? You're staying at a C. And that goes into the grade book. And there's an accountability measure there. And there might be other accountability measures. If you're not focusing, I might have to call home, or I might have to detention, or whatever else. You can still stick with other ways of helping hold students accountable. But now that grade isn't just being used for accountability. It's being used as a reflection of what students know. That's the point of it. You know, and as far as using grades like this, it can work across an entire semester. So for instance, let's say in January, you did a persuasive writing unit and the highest level of mastery of a student demonstrated was a B. Then in February, you did, let's say, like a novel unit, and a student received an A during that unit. And in March, you did a grammar unit and they scored a C. Well, each of those grades reflect their understanding of that competency, and their final grade can be an average of all three of those. Now, I know in some schools that do this competency-based grading, there is no grade point average, and a final report card just lists the grade for each competency, right? It's saying, why would I average in their persuasive writing score with their expository writing score, right? Like those are two different things, and so I don't mix though. Or why would I do something that's completely different from writing and it's just discussion, or it's a novel study, or whatever it is? Why would I incorporate those together? So some schools just give a report card and list each one, and it doesn't have any type of average. But in some schools, maybe where you work, you don't really have that option, right? You have to assign students a final grade. You know that that's what colleges need to see, grade point averages. Or you know that parents expect it, or students expect it, or you expect it, whatever it is. Yeah, you don't have to get rid of all of it. So this is a way of doing that. You can still take an average of their learning throughout a semester, except now the final grade is based on the mastery of competencies rather than student averages from learning units. And so my next tip is to set clear boundaries around retakes. Because here's the concern, and I get it, and I've seen it, and I've witnessed it, and I've heard it from other educators as well, is, hey, if I give students opportunities to just retake their work, if they know they don't have to nail it the first time, they're just going to slack off and not give any effort the first time, and they're just going to retake it later. It's like, I hear you. Absolutely. And so there's some things that we can do, and I bet I could do a whole podcast on this subject, so I'll just scratch the surface here. You could require students that have to complete an extra practice or correction, or maybe a conferencing with you before they're allowed to reassess. So if a student wants to retake, I need to know that they did some learning, right? I need to know that you put in some type of effort to warrant a retake. You're not like buying yourself the retake. You're following the process here. It's saying, this is where I was, then I put in some more effort, and this is where I am now, right? Otherwise, I'm just going to see the same result as the first time you took the test. If you took the test, didn't put any effort, and then you took the test again, you're just going to get the same score. And so I need to see that you put in effort. And so that might mean like, hey, if you want to resubmit your essay, you need to write an entire page talking about what you did to get better, you know what I mean? Or what you did to address my comments. If you want to take the test again, I'm holding a private workshop for anybody that wants to retake. You have to attend that workshop. There might be some extra work that goes alongside it, and this is where you're going to fill in some of those gaps that you missed the first time you took the test. But you have to attend it. And if you don't attend it, or you don't write that extra page, or you don't do the extra homework, or whatever it is that you create, then you're not allowed to retake it, because I don't have any evidence that you did any further learning to improve your score. And so, yeah, I think that's doable, right? Like, and honestly, in the world of ChatGPT and artificial intelligence, and this is another subject, again, and we can just keep digging into this stuff, but in those worlds, it's not that hard to generate follow-up assessments. You could put in a current assessment that you have, and you could go put it right into ChatGPT and say, hey, I want you to create a very similar assessment to this that assesses the same type of standards, but has different questions and answers for students. Create that for me. It will create it so quick before you can even blink, and then you can have students take that, or you can give them materials before they can take it. So you can change things much easier nowadays than you ever were able to in the past. And so it's creating these boundaries, and it's making sure students know that, hey, you are going to have the opportunity for retakes, but it's not as simple as just sitting out the first time because you didn't want to work on it and then just doing it the second time. You have to show that you put in the extra effort. So if you don't put in the effort the first time, well, you're buying yourself more work to do when you could have just done it the first time. So we can dive deeper into that. That sounds like a whole podcast episode. But the last tip for now, because of course I know that there's a lot more we could add to this conversation. And again, I'll do that soon. But the tip is to make the feedback the centerpiece of the assessment. So often, assessment is used solely to signify what a student has learned by the end of a learning unit. We collect this data, but then we move on to the next unit. And the data that we collected from the assessment just becomes evidence of whether the teacher did their job well, or whether the student did their job well. We're not using it to actually improve student learning. It just goes into the grade book, right? It's like when we score a student's essay. If you can't tell, I'm using lots of my English class teaching experience here with all my examples. But let's say when you score a student's essay and you leave a ton of comments on it about what they did well and what they didn't do well, and then you write with a bright red pen their grade at the top of it. Well, how many times have you done this? You leave a bunch of feedback, write the grade on the top, and you watch students get their papers back, and they don't even look at the comments you took all that time to write. They just look at the letter grade, and then the essay goes into the trash. Right? It's frustrating, but I get why they do it. Why go through and read my teacher's comments, especially because a lot of them are critical, and critical feedback stings. Why would I go through and spend all the time to do that if I can't even use those comments to improve my grade, if the essay's final? But when we view assessments as a way to figure out what students need, we can make adjustments to help them meet those needs. These formative assessments, right? Like ones that I'm using to give feedback about what they can do to improve. You know, they could be exit tickets or quick writes or peer assessments or using a rubric to assess class discussion. But that's what the point of good formative assessment is. That's why we use those, is to give feedback to help students grow. That's what all of what we're talking about here is, to grow in mastery of competencies of what I want you to learn. And even some summative assessments, end of unit work, the big ones that assess all of the content standards like essays or unit tests, you know, they can serve formatively as well. You know, if a student gets a summative assessment back and it's a C, and they want a better grade, and they put in the work to improve it, and then they revise it and earn an A, well, that A is representative of what they know. It's accurate. It means they took your feedback and they grew, which is kind of the point of school, right? So let's sum it up. Competency-based grading isn't about throwing out everything you've ever done. It's about aligning our grading practices with what we actually believe about learning. That students can grow, that progress matters, that the most important thing is where they end up, not where they started. When we stop penalizing students for early attempts, when we prioritize feedback and give them space to revise and improve, we're not lowering the bar, we're building a better runway. This shift takes time. Listen, This shift takes time. It can be a little uncomfortable at first. But when we start small and we set clear expectations and we focus on feedback that can move us towards a system that's more accurate and more human and more aligned with the heart of teaching, which is helping students learn, we can help them be more successful. And as a return, we can be more successful ourselves as educators. So that is what I wanted to talk about today. I hope this is helpful. And again, if you want to dive deeper into this, I will link my new article into this podcast notes so you can dive in deeper and learn more about competency-based learning. Again, I'll have a video out on this soon. I'm also in the process of writing a book right now where this is a big piece of it. Because I think the question that we are constantly asking as educators is, what do we want this whole school experience to do for our students? And I think one thing we can do, a concrete way to help them, is instilling a growth mindset that you always have the potential to keep moving forward. And even your grades have the potential to do that as well. So anyway, thank you, friends, for listening to this episode of the Epic Classroom Podcast. My name is Trevor Muir, and it is such a joy to get to share some of these ideas with you. If you haven't already, please take a moment to leave a review of the podcast. It really helps other people find out about it. And if you'd like to check out more of my work, you can go to trevormuir.com, where I've got lots of videos and resources and ideas and writing for you to sink your teeth into. So I will talk to you next time.